I still have the voicemails. 6 years of them, saved in a folder on my phone I rarely open because just looking at the timestamps makes my chest tight. Most of them start the same way. No, hi Maya. Or, how are you? Just her voice, sharp and precise, cutting straight to whatever it was I had supposedly done wrong. Maya, the catering for Sunday is completely wrong. Maya, Caleb tells me you're working late again. And then, the one she left the night before our wedding, the one that's permanently burned into my brain. You can wear the dress, Maya. You can even use our name. But you will never be family. Elena Vance is a woman who commands rooms by simply existing in them. At 62, she runs a boutique estate planning firm in Boston, wears tailored cream pantsuits that never seem to wrinkle, and views life as a series of transactions. If you aren't adding value to the Vance name, you're in deficit. And to Elena, I was the ultimate deficit. I was 26 when I married Caleb. I didn't come from a Boston legacy family. I grew up in a drafty two-bedroom apartment in Worcester, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse. When Caleb and I met at a mutual friend's gallery opening, I was a struggling freelance graphic designer. He was an architect, brilliant but gentle, with a soft edge that his mother had spent 34 years trying to harden. For the first few years of our marriage, I tried everything to bridge the gap. I baked her favorite lemon tarts from scratch for Sunday dinners, only to watch her leave them untouched on the counter. I spent weeks picking out the perfect vintage silk scarf for her birthday, which she promptly gifted to her assistant 3 days later. Eventually, the emotional toll became too heavy. I didn't want to make Caleb choose between his mother and his wife, so I chose for him. I stepped back. I stopped going to the Sunday dinners. I stopped calling. Caleb still went. He loved his mother, and he felt a deep, ingrained obligation to protect her, but he respected my boundary. We built a quiet, happy life in our modest townhouse in Jamaica Plain. My business finally took off, evolving from shaky freelance gigs into a stable branding agency. We were saving for a house with a yard. We were content. Until 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday evening, right around 7:30 p.m. The rain was drumming against our kitchen windows, and Caleb was at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. My phone was on the island, face up. When it lit up with Elena's name, my stomach dropped instantly. She never called me. Never. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the green button. Caleb, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Your mom is calling my phone. He turned around, wooden spoon in hand, his brow furrowing. That's weird. She just texted me an hour ago asking about a blueprint. I answered it, bracing myself. Hello, Elena. There was no sharp critique. No cold, commanding tone. Instead, there was a heavy, ragged silence, followed by a sound I had never heard in 6 years. Elena Vance was crying. Not a polite, controlled sniffle, but a raw, breathless sob that made my own breath hitch. Maya, she gasped out, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. Maya, please. You have to help me. I have nowhere else to go. I stared at Caleb, my heart hammering against my ribs. He stepped closer, his face turning pale as he heard his mother's broken voice bleeding through the receiver. Elena, what's wrong? I asked, the old instinct to appease her kicking in, mixed with a sudden, sharp spike of anxiety. Are you hurt? Where are you? I'm at the office, she whispered. The locks have been changed. The bank, they've frozen everything, Maya. The house in Beacon Hill, the firm's accounts, my personal savings. It's all gone. What do you mean it's gone? Caleb interjected, leaning over my shoulder. Mom, what are you talking about? Who changed the locks? Richard, she choked out. Richard Vance. Elena's younger brother, and her partner at the firm for the last 20 years. He was the golden boy of the family, charming, effortlessly smooth, and someone Elena trusted implicitly. While Elena handled the legalities and the clients, Richard managed the firm's back-end finances and investments. He's been embezzling from me estate accounts for over 5 years, Caleb. Elena sobbed, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The federal investigators showed up at my house this morning with a seizure warrant. Richard signed everything into my name. The shell companies, the fraudulent transfers, he used my digital signature on all the authorization forms. He fled to a non-extradition country last night. They think I did it. They think I'm the mastermind. The next 48 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, cold coffee, and the terrifying reality of federal law. Elena spent a night in a holding cell before Caleb and I could scrape together enough liquidity to secure her temporary release, though her assets remained completely frozen. When we brought her back to our townhouse, she looked like a ghost of herself. The cream pantsuit was gone, replaced by a borrowed sweatshirt of Caleb's that swallowed her small frame. She sat at our kitchen table, staring into a mug of tea, her hands shaking so badly the ceramic clicked against the wood. That was when the first real secret unraveled. Caleb's firm had been doing subcontracting work for Elena's high-net-worth clients for the past 2 years. It was a point of pride for Caleb. He thought his mother was finally recognizing his talent. But as we sat at the table with the emergency defense attorney we hired, a man named Marcus, the truth came out like a bucket of ice water. "Elena," Marcus said, laying out a stack of financial documents on our table. "The feds aren't just looking at the firm's corporate accounts. They're tracking the secondary flow of funds." Richard funneled nearly $2 million through Caleb's Architectural Consulting, LLC. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at Caleb, whose face had gone completely bloodless. "What?" Caleb whispered. I just did the design work. My mom sent me the contracts. I deposited the checks into our joint savings account." "The contracts were fake, Caleb," Elena whispered, refusing to look either of us in the eye. She stared down at her tea, her voice dropping to a guilty murmur. "Richard told me we needed to move money quickly to clear a tax audit. He told me it was completely legal, just a restructuring. I didn't check the fine print. I just needed to protect the family asset. I used your LLC because it wouldn't flag an immediate audit." "You used us." I stood up so fast my chair scraped violently against the floor. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic. "You put Caleb's name, his career, our savings on a fraudulent paper trail to cover a tax audit." "I didn't know Richard was stealing," Elena cried, finally looking up, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "I thought I was saving the firm. I thought if it stayed within the family, it would be safe. But I wasn't family, remember?" The words popped out of me before I could stop them, dripping with years of accumulated bitterness. "That's what you told me, Elena. But now our joint account, the money I earned, the money my mother helped us save, is tied up in a federal embezzlement investigation because of your family asset?" She didn't answer. She just buried her face in her hands. Marcus cleared his throat, drawing our attention back to the documents. "It gets worse," he said quietly. "Because the money moved through a joint account held by both Caleb and Maya, the feds have flagged Maya's independent branding agency as a potential co-conspirator entity. They suspect the agency was used to launder the secondary interest." I sank back into my chair, my knees suddenly turning to water. My business, the late nights, the tears, the clients I had spent years building relationships with, all of it was on the chopping block because of a family that had spent 6 years making sure I knew I didn't belong. For 3 days, the tension in our small townhouse was suffocating. Elena stayed in our guest room, keeping the door shut, while Caleb and I spoke in hushed, angry whispers in the hallway. He was torn apart by guilt, caught between the mother who had compromised his entire life and the wife whose world was crumbling because of it. On Friday morning, Marcus called us with an urgent update. He arrived at our house an hour later, carrying a thick, blue manila folder. "There's a way out," Marcus said, looking directly at me. "But it's incredibly narrow, and it requires a massive sacrifice." He opened the folder and slid a single-page document across the table. It was a formal affidavit, prepared for the U.S. Attorney's Office. "The federal prosecutors are willing to offer Elena a deferred prosecution agreement," Marcus explained. "They recognize that Richard was the primary actor, but they need someone to take accountability for the negligence that allowed it to happen. If Elena signs this, she forfeits her license, pays a massive civil penalty, and the case against her is closed." More importantly, the investigation into Caleb's LLC and Maya's agency is dropped immediately. Your funds will be unfrozen. Thank God, Caleb breathed, a wave of relief washing over his face. Mom, you just have to sign it. It's over. It's not that simple, Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a heavy, professional gravity. Because of the way Richard structured the final transfer, the legal ownership of the primary Vance holding company, the one that holds the remaining unseized commercial real estate, technically shifted. Right now, on paper, that holding company doesn't belong to Elena. And it doesn't belong to Caleb. I frowned, a cold dread creeping up my spine. Then who does it belong to? Marcus turned the document around, pointing to the blank signature line at the bottom. 3 years ago, when you and Caleb bought this townhouse, Elena set up a blind family trust as a tax shelter for your down payment. She put your name on the trust's secondary oversight board to satisfy the bank's structural requirements, assuming it would never matter. But when Richard panicked and moved the final block of commercial assets last week, he routed them through that specific trust. Marcus looked me dead in the eye. Elena can't sign this agreement. Caleb can't sign it. Maya, on paper, you are the sole executing trustee of the asset block the government is seizing. The feds will only drop the charges against Elena and clear your business if you sign this document, voluntarily surrendering the trust and accepting personal, civil liability for the oversight failure. If you sign, Elena walks away clean and your business is safe. But you'll have a federal civil judgment on your permanent record. The room went dead silent. Elena slowly lifted her head. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't look at me with disdain. She looked at me with absolute, terrifying desperation. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers trembling, and touched the back of my hand. Maya, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please. If you don't sign this, I'm going to prison. Everything I built, my entire life, is gone. Please, save my family. I looked down at her hand on mine. Then I looked at the signature line. If I signed, I would protect my business, but I would carry the legal scar of the Vance family's corruption for the rest of my life. I would be saving the woman who had humiliated me, excluded me, and degraded my mother's background. If I refused, Elena would go to prison. But my business would likely be dragged through a public trial, destroying everything I had built from nothing. I looked up at Elena, my face hardening as a sudden, sharp realization hit me. I pulled my hand away from hers. Marcus, I said slowly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline roaring in my ears. If I sign this, the commercial real estate in that trust is surrendered to the government to pay the fines, correct? Yes, Marcus replied. And what happens to the remaining equity in that specific trust after the fines are cleared? Marcus paused, shifting his papers. He looked at Elena, then back at me. There is a residual clause. Because of the way Richard structured the panic transfer, any remaining equity after the federal fines are satisfied doesn't revert to Elena. It stays with the executing trustee. I looked at Elena. Her eyes widened as she realized exactly what Marcus was saying. How much residual equity is left? I asked. Marcus swallowed hard. Approximately $1.4 million. In liquid cash. The very assets Elena had spent her entire life hoarding, the wealth she used as a weapon to keep me out, was now entirely dependent on my pen. If I signed, I didn't just save her. I became the owner of the remnants of her empire. I looked at Caleb. He was watching me, terrified, waiting to see what I would do. I looked at Elena, whose breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. I reached out and picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I brought the tip down to the paper, right above the line that read Executing Trustee. But right before the ink touched the page, I stopped. I looked up at Elena, and for the first time in 6 years, I was the one in control. I'll sign it, I said quietly. But under one condition. Elena's hand froze midair, hovering inches above the polished wood of our kitchen table. The desperation in her eyes hardened, just for a fraction of a second, into a familiar flicker of defensive pride. But she looked at the thick blue manila folder, then back at my hand holding the pen, and the pride evaporated. She was a cornered animal, and she knew it. "What condition?" she whispered, her voice so thin it sounded like dry autumn leaves scraping across pavement. Caleb leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table. "Maya, whatever it is, we can figure it out later. Just, let's get her out of jeopardy first. Please." I didn't look at Caleb. I kept my eyes locked on Elena. "No, Caleb. We aren't figuring anything out later. 6 years of later is how we ended up here." I turned my attention fully back to his mother. "The condition is simple, Elena. You sign a separate, legally binding agreement right now, drafted by Marcus, stating that you will never hold a position of authority, formal or informal, in any entity connected to my branding agency or Caleb's career. You will retire fully. You will step away from the Vance name's professional legacy. And you will formally apologize to my mother, in writing, for what you said to her at our rehearsal dinner." A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the kitchen. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, a relentless thumping against the glass. Elena's jaw tightened. Her pale skin flushed a deep, angry crimson. To a woman like Elena, losing her money was a tragedy. Losing her status, her pride, and being forced to bow to a woman she viewed as a working-class nobody was a fate worse than death. "Maya," she hissed, her voice dropping into a dangerous, low register. "You are leveraging my freedom for a petty vendetta?" "It's not a vendetta, Elena. It's a boundary," I said, my voice dead calm. "You told me I would never be family. You used my husband's business as a shield for a criminal enterprise. You jeopardized my life's work. If I'm going to carry a federal civil judgment on my record to clean up your mess, I'm going to ensure you never have the power to touch my life again. Take it or leave it. Marcus can call the U.S. Attorney's Office right now and tell them we're opting for a trial." Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting his gaze from me to Elena, his pen poised over his legal notepad. "If we are going to execute a side agreement regarding corporate stepping down and personal stipulations, it needs to be done before the federal affidavit is filed. Otherwise, it could look like extortion under duress." "Draft it," Elena said suddenly. The words came out of her like a deflating balloon. She looked defeated, her shoulders slumping into Caleb's oversized sweatshirt. "Draft it, Marcus. I'll sign." It took 2 hours for Marcus to draft the secondary agreement and for everyone to sign the necessary paperwork. When my pen finally hit the paper of the federal affidavit, my hand was steady, but my chest felt like it was being crushed by a vice. Executing trustee. With a few strokes of ink, I had legally bound myself to the wreckage of the Vance family fortune. By the time Marcus left, taking the documents with him to deliver to the prosecutor, it was past 1 p.m. The immediate terror of the situation had passed, replaced by a hollow, exhausting numbness. Elena stood up from the table without a word, refusing to look at either of us, and retreated into the guest room, locking the door behind her with a sharp click. I sat alone at the island, staring at the empty mugs. Caleb walked up behind me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. I expected warmth, or a sigh of relief, but his grip was tense. "You shouldn't have done that, Maya," he said quietly. I stiffened, pulling away from his touch and turning around to face him. "Done what? Saved your mother from prison? Saved your LLC from being dismantled. You backed her into a corner about my career and your mother," Caleb said, his brow furrowing as a deep-seated frustration broke through his usual gentle demeanor. "She was breaking down, Maya. She was terrified. You used her lowest moment to humiliate her. That's not who you are. You think this is about humiliation?" I stood up, the anger I had suppressed all morning finally boiling over. "Caleb, she put our joint account on a fraudulent paper trail. She endangered my business. And your first instinct is to protect her feelings because I asked for an apology for my mother? The woman who raised me alone, who you let your mother insult for 6 years without ever truly standing up to her." "I did stand up to her," Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. It was rare for him to raise his voice, and the sound of it echoed sharply in our small kitchen. "I moved out here with you. I stopped going to the dinners when it got too much. I've been caught in the middle of this Cold War for years, Maya. But she's still my mother. And seeing you treat her like an enemy when she came to us for help, it changes how I look at you. The words felt like a physical blow. It changes how I look at you. I stare at my husband, the man I had built a quiet, peaceful life with, and realize the crack in our foundation hadn't just appeared today. It had been there all along, hidden behind the boundaries and the silent agreements. He had never truly extracted himself from Elena's web. Even now, when she had ruined his financial stability, he was defending her honor against his wife. "If you don't like how I look," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "maybe you should go check on her. Because I need to get out of this house." I grabbed my car keys from the counter and walked out into the rain before he could answer. I drove for hours, aimlessly navigating the slick, gray streets of Boston until the fuel light flickered on. I ended up in the parking lot of a diner near my office, sitting in the dark, watching the windshield wipers fight a losing battle against the downpour. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was an email notification from Marcus. Attached was the fully executed copy of the federal agreement, stamped by the U.S. Attorney's Office, along with the confirmation of the asset release. The freeze on my branding agency's accounts would be lifted by Monday morning. The civil judgment against me was official, but the criminal investigation was dead. And then there was the second attachment, the bank routing confirmation for the residual equity of the trust. $1,432,081.14. It was sitting in a new, isolated account under my sole name. I stared at the numbers on the screen. I was a millionaire. The very woman who had looked down her nose at my background, who had treated me like a stray dog Caleb had brought home, had just been legally stripped of her remaining wealth to buy her freedom, and it had landed directly in my lap. But there was no joy in it. No sense of triumph. My marriage felt like it was splintering. My reputation had a permanent federal blemish, and the silence from Caleb's phone, no texts, no calls asking where I was deafening. By the time I finally drove back to the townhouse, it was near midnight. The lights downstairs were off. I unlocked the front door quietly, slipping my shoes off in the entryway. The house was dead silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, trying to clear the dry, bitter taste from my mouth. As I reached for glass, I noticed a piece of paper sitting on the island, held down by Elena's empty tea mug. It was a handwritten note on a piece of legal pad paper. Elena's elegant, precise cursive handwriting was unmistakable. "Maya, the apology to your mother has been mailed. The agreement has been signed. You have taken my money, my career, and my dignity. I hope it is enough to satisfy whatever emptiness you carry inside you. But you should know something before you think you've won. Richard didn't just panic and move those assets into the trust last week. He didn't act alone. I told you I didn't check the fine print, and that was the truth. But Caleb did. Caleb knew about the secondary flow of funds 6 months ago. He approved the transfers into your joint account to secure the down payment on this very townhouse. He didn't protect you, Maya. He protected his legacy. Ask him about the secondary ledger in his office desk." "Elena." The glass slipped from my fingers. It hit the hardwood floor, shattering into 100 sharp, glittering pieces, the sound exploding through the quiet house. My heart was hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The room seemed to tilt. Caleb knew? I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I turned away from the shattered glass and walked down the hallway toward the small spare bedroom Caleb used as an architectural home office. My hands were shaking violently as I pushed the door open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I walked over to his heavy oak desk, my knees trembling so badly I could barely stand. I pulled open the bottom right drawer, the deep one where he kept old blueprints and tax records. I dug through the folders, my fingers tearing at the tabs until I found it, a slim, black leather-bound ledger. I opened it, using the flashlight on my phone to guide my eyes. Page after page of meticulous, handwritten numbers. Dates going back 2 years. Transfers from Elena's firm, routed through Caleb's LLC, and then deposited into our joint savings account. And next to every single entry, in Caleb's neat, architectural block lettering, were the initials, MV and CV. Maya Vance. Caleb Vance. He hadn't been an innocent bystander. He hadn't just done design work. He had systematically tracked the movement of the money that bought our home, the money that supported my business when it was shaky, the money that tied me directly to his family's corruption. He had let me sign that federal affidavit today, letting me take the civil liability to save his mother, knowing all along that he was just as guilty. Maya? I gasped, spinning around. Caleb was standing in the doorway of the office, rubbing his eyes, wearing his gray sweatpants. He looked tired, but as his eyes traveled from my face down to the black ledger in my shaking hands, the sleepiness instantly vanished. His face went entirely white, his posture stiffening into a rigid, terrifying stillness. "What are you doing with that?" he whispered. The black leather book felt heavy in my hands, almost sticky, like the corruption written on its pages was bleeding into my skin. I didn't drop it. I held it up between us, a physical barrier of truth cutting through the darkness of the room. "What is this, Caleb?" My voice didn't sound like mine. It was hollow, stripped of all the anger from earlier, leaving only a vast, freezing void. Caleb took a slow step into the office, his hands raised slightly, palms out, as if he were approaching a volatile situation. "Maya, put the book down. Let's go into the living room. Let me explain." "Explain what?" I demanded, the volume of my voice rising as the numbness began to crack. "Explain that you knew? Explain that while I was crying on the kitchen floor 3 weeks ago thinking our lives were over, you already knew exactly where the money came from? You let me believe your mother was the sole villain here." "She is the villain," Caleb said, his voice desperate, a sharp contrast to his rigid posture. "She and Richard started this long before I ever found out. Maya, I swear to you, I didn't know anything in the beginning. I thought the consulting fees were legitimate. But 6 months ago, I found a discrepancy in the firm's year-end payout. I confronted Richard. He told me everything. And instead of telling me, instead of going to the police, you started a secret ledger?" I stepped back, my spine hitting the edge of the desk. "You kept taking the money. I did it for us." Caleb took another step forward, his eyes wide, pleading. "We were trying to buy this place. Your business was struggling with cash flow last winter, remember? We needed the security. Richard promised me that if I kept quiet, he would phase out the LLC transfers by the end of the fiscal year. He said it was just a temporary bridge. I didn't know he was going to run. I didn't know the feds were already building a case." "You lied to me," I whispered, the realization cutting deeper than any federal investigation ever could. "Every single day for 6 months, you sat across from me at breakfast, you kissed me goodbye, you talked about our future, and you knew our entire life was built on stolen money." "I was trying to protect you," he said, his voice breaking. "Protect me?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my throat. "Caleb, I just signed a federal affidavit today. I took civil liability for the oversight failure of that trust. I have a federal judgment on my permanent record now. If the U.S. Attorney's Office finds this ledger, if they realize you had knowledge of the fraudulent transfers 6 months ago, that affidavit is void. They will look at this as an act of cover-up. They will charge you with conspiracy, and they will drag my agency right back into the center of it." Caleb stopped moving. The reality of what he had done, of the paper trail he had meticulously kept in his own handwriting, seemed to finally hit him. He looked down at the book in my hand, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The gentle, supportive husband I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger who had gambled our lives away to protect a family name that had never given him anything but conditional love. "Where is she?" I asked suddenly, my eyes darting toward the hallway. "Where is Elena?" "She left," Caleb said quietly, his shoulders slumping. "About an hour after you did. She called a car. She said she couldn't stay here anymore. She didn't tell me where she was going, Maya. She just left the note. She left the note to destroy us," I said, the clarity of Elena's final act hitting me. She hadn't just given up her dignity. She had ensured that if she was going down, she was taking our marriage with her. She had unraveled the final thread of my trust in Caleb with a few lines of elegant cursive. I looked down at the ledger, then back at Caleb. "We have to destroy this." Caleb blinked, surprised. What? If Marcus or the investigators see this, we are both ruined. You go to prison, and I lose everything I actually worked for, I said, my voice hardening into pure survival mode. Get a lighter. We're burning it in the kitchen sink. Caleb nodded quickly, the relief evident on his face as he turned to head toward the kitchen. He thought this meant I was on his side. He thought this meant we were partners in crime now. But as I followed him out of the dark office, holding the black book tight against my chest, I knew the truth. I wasn't doing this to save him. I was doing this to save myself. The man I loved was already gone. I was just protecting the executing trustee of the Vance remnants. 20 minutes later, the smell of burnt paper and leather hung heavy in the kitchen. The ashes of the ledger were washed down the drain, leaving nothing but a dark smudge on the stainless steel sink. Caleb leaned against the counter, his hands trembling as he ran a towel over the sink, erasing the final traces. He looked up at me, a tentative, exhausted smile on his face. Thank you, Maya. I know I screwed up, but we can move past this now. The money from the trust is yours. We can pay off the civil fines, clear your name eventually, and just start over. Somewhere else. I stood on the other side of the island, the broken glass from earlier still glittering on the floor near my feet. There is no we anymore, Caleb. His smile faded instantly. What do you mean? Maya, we just burned the evidence. It's over. The legal danger might be over, but this marriage is dead, I said, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion he was begging for. You let me sacrifice my reputation today for a lie. You let me take the fall for your mother, knowing you were just as guilty of using me. I'm staying in the townhouse. You're leaving. Maya, please. If you don't pack a bag right now, I interrupted, pointing toward the front door, I will call Marcus first thing in the morning and tell him I want to rescind the affidavit based on newly discovered fraudulent non-disclosure. I will tank the whole agreement, Caleb. I don't care anymore. I have $1.4 million in an account you can't touch, and I have the power to let the feds dismantle whatever is left of your family. Do not test me. Caleb stared at me, realizing for the first time that the gentle, accommodating woman he had married was completely gone. I had learned from the best. 6 years of Elena Vance's cold, transactional world had finally rubbed off on me, but instead of using it to exclude people, I was using it to cut him out of my life entirely. He didn't argue. He walked past me, his head down, and disappeared into the bedroom. 30 minutes later, the front door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the quiet, smoke-scented house. For the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into my work. The freeze on my business accounts had been lifted on Monday, just as Marcus promised. My clients never knew how close they came to losing their branding agency. To the outside world, I was Maya Lin, successful entrepreneur, expanding her business with a sudden influx of capital. I hired a cleaning crew to scrub the townhouse, erasing every trace of Caleb and Elena. I moved my things into the master bedroom, reclaiming the space. I felt a cold, sharp sense of peace. I had won. I had the money, I had my freedom, and the Vances were out of my life. Until this morning, I was sitting at the kitchen island, drinking my coffee, when a certified letter was delivered to my door. It wasn't from Marcus. It wasn't from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was from a private estate liquidity firm based out of New York. I tore the envelope open, pulling out a 3-page document. As my eyes scanned the legal language, the cold peace I had built over the last fortnight shattered into dust. Dear Ms. Lin, we are writing to inform you of a priority lien executed against the Vance Family Trust asset block prior to your assumption of the role of executing trustee. Per the structural filings completed by Richard Vance and co-signed by an authorized representative of Caleb Vance LLC 4 months ago, the $1.4 million in residual equity was legally designated as collateral for a secondary, private corporate loan default. As the sole executing trustee who assumed civil liability, you are now legally responsible for the outstanding balance of the defaulted loan. The current balance due is $2.8 million. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in the immediate liquidation of all connected assets, including your independent corporate entity, Lin Branding Agency. My breath caught in my throat. The room spun. The $1.4 million wasn't a windfall. It was a trap. Richard hadn't just moved the assets to hide them from the feds. He had leveraged them, and Caleb's LLC had signed off on the collateral designation 4 months ago. By signing that affidavit to save Elena and clear my business, I hadn't taken over a fortune. I had legally signed my name to a $2.8 million debt I couldn't pay. My phone rang on the counter. The caller ID showed an unknown number. My hands shook as I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. Hello. Did you get the letter, Maya? It wasn't Caleb. It was Elena. Her voice was no longer broken or crying. It was cold, precise, and triumphant, exactly how it sounded on the voicemails I had saved for 6 years. You thought you could strip me of my dignity and take my money, Elena whispered through the line, a low, chilling chuckle echoing in my ear. I told you, Maya. You can use our name, but you will never be family. And you will never beat us. Elena, I choked out, my grip tightening on the phone. What did you do? I didn't do anything, she said smoothly. But Caleb is a Vance, after all. He knows how to protect the asset. And right now, he's sitting across from me in my new apartment. The line went dead with a soft, final click. I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow hum of the disconnected signal. The silence of the townhouse felt heavier now, suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in on me. Caleb is sitting across from me. The words repeated in my mind, a cruel, mocking loop. I dropped the phone onto the counter and looked down at the certified letter spread before me. The legal jargon blurred together, but the numbers screamed off the page. $2.8 million. My mind raced back to the kitchen sink, to the smell of burning leather and paper, to the relief on Caleb's face as the ash washed away. He hadn't been relieved because we were destroying the evidence of his complicity. He had been relieved because the only physical record tying him directly to the initial fraudulent transfers was gone. The ledger was ashes, but the digital corporate filings, the ones hidden in the blind trust secondary layers that Marcus hadn't unearthed, were permanent. He hadn't left the house broken and defeated. He had walked out knowing exactly what was waiting for me in the mail. I grabbed my keys and my purse, my movements purely fueled by a sudden, volatile surge of adrenaline. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them hiding in this house. I drove straight to Marcus's office in downtown Boston, running 2 yellow lights, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I burst through the glass doors of his firm, his receptionist stood up, startled. Ms. Lin, you don't have an appointment. I need to see Marcus. Now, I said, my voice shaking but absolute. Marcus emerged from a side conference room, a stack of folders in his hand. Seeing the look on my face, his professional composure faltered for a second. He nodded to his receptionist. It's fine, Sarah. Maya, come in. I marched into his office and slammed the 3-page document onto his desk. Did you know about this? I demanded. When you handed me that pen 2 weeks ago, did you know the trust was leveraged? Marcus picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the header. As he read, a deep line formed between his eyebrows. He sank into his leather chair, flipping through the pages slowly. The silence in the room was deafening. No, Marcus said quietly, looking up at me with genuine distress. Maya, I swear to you I didn't. The federal disclosure documents only covered assets seized or flagged under the criminal indictment against Richard and Elena. This is a private civil lien held by a secondary liquidity firm out of state. It wasn't part of the U.S. Attorney's criminal filing because, on paper, it was structured as a legitimate corporate loan against the holding company's equity. Co-signed by Caleb Vance, LLC. I spat out, dropping into the chair opposite him. 4 months ago, my husband signed off on it, Marcus. He knew the money coming to me was poison. Marcus rubbed his temples. If Caleb's LLC signed as the secondary oversight board representative, then legally, the liquidity firm has a bulletproof claim. When you signed the federal affidavit as the executing trustee, you didn't just inherit the residual equity. You inherited the corporate entity's existing debts. Under Massachusetts trust law, the debt attaches to the asset pool and its executor. If the trust can't pay, they can pursue your personal and corporate assets because they were flagged as secondary interest accounts in the federal filing. They're going to take my agency, I whispered, the reality crashing down on me like a tidal wave. Everything I built, everything I did to survive them. Unless we can prove fraud or duress, Marcus said, leaning forward. But Maya, you burned the ledger. You told me you destroyed the only copy of the internal numbers Caleb was keeping. Because I thought it would send him to prison. I cried, burying my face in my hands. I thought I was protecting my business from being dragged into a criminal trial. I didn't know I was walking right into a financial firing squad. We need leverage, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. Elena and Caleb think they've insulated themselves. Elena got her deferred prosecution. Caleb's LLC was cleared of criminal intent by your affidavit, and the money is gone. But if Caleb co-signed a private loan document using trust equity that he knew was derived from Richard's embezzlement, that's bank fraud. It's a separate civil crime. If we can prove he had knowledge of the fraud at the time of the loan signing 4 months ago, we can void the collateral agreement.
How?
I looked up, my eyes burning. The ledger is gone. It's just my word against theirs. And Elena is already back in his ear. You need him to admit it, Marcus said. On record. Or you need to find where Richard hid the digital authorization logs. Richard fled, but his servers didn't. The federal prosecutors have copies of the firm's hard drives. If I can file an emergency discovery motion under the civil lien defense, we might be able to get access to the digital correspondence between Richard and Caleb from 4 months ago. How long will that take? 3 to 4 weeks just to get a judge to sign off on the motion, Marcus said grimly. And the liquidity firm gave you 30 days before liquidation begins. We don't have time to play nice, Maya. I left Marcus's office with a cold, hollow determination. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for a judge to sign a piece of paper while my life's work was dismantled. Elena wanted to play a transactional game?
Fine.
I was going to use the one thing she didn't think I had. Nothing left to lose. I didn't call Caleb. I didn't call Elena. Instead, I drove to the one place Elena Vance would never expect to see me, the Vance family's old estate office in Beacon Hill. The feds had changed the locks on the primary doors, but I knew from Caleb's late-night rants years ago that the building had a secondary service entrance through the attached brownstone garage, a garage Caleb still had a key code for, which he had written in our shared password manager app. The rain had stopped, leaving the brick alleyways of Beacon Hill slick and reflecting the amber streetlights. It was past 8 p.m. when I pulled up. The alley was deserted. I walked up to the keyless entry pad by the service door. My fingers hovered over the plastic buttons. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm. If I was caught here, it was breaking and entering. It was a violation of the very federal terms I had just signed. I punched in the code Caleb had used for years. 0-8-2-4.
His birthday.
The mechanism clicked. A green light flashed. The door swung open with a heavy, muted groan. The interior of the building was dark, smelling faintly of old paper, mahogany polish, and stale coffee. I clicked on my phone's flashlight, keeping the beam low to the floor as I navigated the back hallway toward the central filing room and Richard's old office. The main office rooms were stripped, desks were empty, and boxes labeled evidence, FBI, were stacked near the doorways. The feds had taken the physical hard drives and the primary servers. But I wasn't looking for the hardware. I was looking for Richard's old offline backup system, a legacy network drive he kept hardwired into the building's climate control closet to avoid cloud tracking, something Caleb had mentioned during a dinner argument about the firm's outdated infrastructure. I found the maintenance closet at the end of the hall. The lock was a standard keyway. I pulled a small, heavy metal nail file from my purse, jammed it into the mechanism, and twisted with all my weight. With a sharp, painful pop that jarred my wrist, the cheap lock gave way. Inside, tucked behind the ventilation pipes, a small black box with a single blinking blue light sat humming quietly in the dark. Richard's localized network-attached storage. The feds had missed it because it was wired directly into the building's thermostat power grid. I pulled a USB data bridge cable from my bag, something Marcus had given me just in case, and plugged it into my laptop. The drive directory began to populate on my screen, line after line of encrypted data folders. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I searched for folders dated exactly 4 months ago. Folder. RV_CV_private_secure. I clicked it open. Inside were 3 PDF files and a series of audio logs from an encrypted messaging app Richard used. I downloaded them onto my desktop, my breath catching as the progress bar crept toward 100%. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors at the front of the main office creaked open. I froze, my hand hovering over the mouse. The sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed down the hardwood hallway. 2 voices, muffled but distinct, were approaching the back corridor. I told you, we need to make sure the physical client logs from the safe are completely cleared before the civil receivers take possession next week, a woman's voice said, sharp, precise, and instantly recognizable. Elena, the feds already cleared the safe, Mom. A second voice replied, gentle but laced with a cold, defensive edge. Caleb, they were here, in the building, and the only way out of the maintenance closet was the hallway they were currently walking down. My laptop screen glared brightly in the dark closet, the progress bar for the final audio file sitting at 92%. I held my breath, the air burning in my lungs, as the footsteps stopped right outside the closet door. The progress bar on my laptop hit 95%. Every tick of the percentage felt like a hammer striking my chest. Outside the thin wooden door of the maintenance closet, the rustle of Caleb's jacket was so close I could hear the fabric brushing against the frame. The feds don't know about the secondary lockbox behind the HVAC panel, Caleb. Elena's voice was sharp, hushed, but entirely devoid of the trembling panic she had faked at my kitchen table. If Richard's backup drive is still humming, it means the private ledger sync is intact. We get that drive. We delete the authorization logs, and the New York liquidity firm has no way to tie the loan's origin to prior fraud. Maya takes the fall, the debt stays with the trust, and we walk away with the remaining capital from the secondary shell. And if she fights it?
Caleb asked.
His voice sounded different here. It wasn't the voice of the man who had cooked pasta in my kitchen or held me when my business was failing. It was cold, analytical. He sounded exactly like a Vance. She's smart, Mom. She went straight to Marcus today. Let her fight, Elena whispered, and I could practically see the icy smile on her face. She signed the federal affidavit. She legally declared herself responsible for the oversight. By the time Marcus can get a judge to look at a civil motion, her agency will be liquidated to pay the initial default interest. She won't have the money to pay for a lawyer, let alone fight a legacy family. 99%. Transfer complete. I snapped the laptop shut, the muted thud of the plastic casing sounding like a gunshot in my ears. Outside, the footsteps stopped instantly. What was that? Elena hissed. The wind from the garage door, probably, Caleb said, but his footsteps instantly shifted. They were coming toward the closet. The doorknob jiggled. I didn't hide. I didn't cower behind the pipes. I stood right in the center of the dark maintenance room, took a deep breath, and shoved the door open from the inside. The door swung wide, banging against the drywall. Caleb stumbled back, his eyes widening in absolute horror as the beam of my phone's flashlight caught him square in the face. Standing right behind him, her cream coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, was Elena. Her mouth opened slightly, her poised facade cracking for a fraction of a second before hardening back into stone. Maya, Caleb breathed, his face turning an asymmetric shade of gray. What are you doing here? I was just downloading the fine print, Caleb, I said, my voice dead calm, though the adrenaline was roaring through my veins like wildfire. I stepped out of the closet, holding my laptop tightly under one arm, my phone in the other. The fine print you forgot to mention when we burned that little black notebook. Elena recovered first. She stepped over her son, her eyes narrowing into slits. You are trespassing, Maya. You are breaking and entering a corporate property under federal receivership. I could call the police right now and have your little affidavit torn to shreds. Call them, I said, taking a step toward her. I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like the working-class girl from Worcester trying to bake lemon tarts for a woman who despised her. I felt entirely whole. Call the U.S. Attorney's Office, Elena. Tell them to come down here. Because while you were busy planning how to liquidate my life, I was downloading folder. RV_CV_private_secure. Caleb's breath hitched. He looked at the glowing screen of my laptop, then at his mother. Maya, listen to me.
No, Caleb.
You listen to me. I interrupted, turning my gaze to him. The pain of his betrayal was there, deep and cutting, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was clear. I have the audio logs. I have the files from 4 months ago where Richard explicitly tells you that the $2.8 million loan from the New York firm was being secured using embezzled client funds as collateral. I have your voice, Caleb, recorded on an encrypted message saying, asterisk, as long as Maya's name is on the secondary trust board, she'll carry the liability if the audit fails. Asterisk. The hallway went dead silent. Caleb looked down at the floor, his shoulders slumping, the last remnants of his gentle persona evaporating into the damp air of the building. He had nothing left to say. You think you're a mastermind, Elena? I turned back to the matriarch. You think because you raised a son to be just as transactional and ruthless as you are, you've won? You didn't leave a note to Caleb to destroy my marriage. You left it because you're a coward who couldn't handle the fact that you needed my signature to stay out of a cage. But here's the thing about transactions, they have to balance out. And your debt is finally due. What do you want? Elena hissed, her voice vibrating with a quiet, venomous rage. Money? You want the residual equity?
Take it.
Take it all and disappear. I already have the residual equity, Elena. It's in my account, I said. But I'm not using it to pay your fraudulent loan. Tomorrow morning, Marcus is delivering this network drive to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the New York liquidity firm. The loan contract will be voided due to systemic bank fraud. The $2.8 million debt will revert directly to the signees, Caleb Vance LLC, and the Vance Holding Estate. Your deferred prosecution? It's gone. Because you lied on your disclosure forms about hidden liabilities. Maya, please. Caleb stepped forward, his eyes filling with tears, reaching out a hand to touch my arm. They'll send me to prison. I did it for us. I did it to build a life for you. I stepped back, completely out of his reach. I looked at his tears, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt absolutely nothing. You didn't do it for me, Caleb. You did it because you were too weak to build a life on your own, and too proud to admit your family was a hollow shell. I said quietly, you can wear the name, Caleb. You can keep the legacy. But you're going to carry the weight of it alone. I walked past them. Neither of them tried to stop me. Elena stood frozen like a statue of salt, her eyes fixed on the empty maintenance closet, realizing that everything she had spent her life hoarding, her status, her firm, her son's future, had just been dismantled by the woman she said would never be family. The next 6 months were a slow, methodical unraveling of the Vance name. Marcus delivered the digital files to the federal prosecutors the following morning. The fallout was immediate. The U.S. Attorney's Office revoked Elena's deferred prosecution agreement due to fraudulent concealment of liabilities. She was indicted on 3 counts of conspiracy and bank fraud. 2 months ago, she took a plea deal to avoid a public trial. At 62 years old, she was sentenced to 48 months in a federal correctional institution. Caleb's LLC was dismantled. Because his signature was on the collateral loan paperwork with proven knowledge of the fraudulent origin, he was charged as a co-conspirator. His architectural license was permanently revoked, and he received a sentence of 2 years at a low-security facility, followed by a massive restitution order that wiped out his remaining personal savings. My independent branding agency was completely cleared. The federal judgment against me was wiped clean once the prosecutors established that my signature on the initial affidavit had been obtained through systemic family fraud and material non-disclosure. The $1.4 million in residual equity from the blind trust remained in my account. After paying Marcus's legal fees, I took the remaining balance and did something I had wanted to do for a very long time. I bought a beautiful, sunlit historic building in Worcester, converted the top floor into a modern, airy office space for my expanding agency, and bought the first floor commercial space to open a community nursing outreach center. I named it after my mother. Today is a quiet Sunday afternoon. The sun is streaming through the large front windows of my new office, casting long, warm golden boxes across the hardwood floor. My mother is sitting on the plush sofa in the corner, holding a cup of tea. There are no shattered glasses here. No hushed, angry whispers. Just the gentle sound of the city outside and the deep, anchoring sense of peace that comes from a life built honestly, brick by brick. She looks up at me, a soft smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "You look happy, Maya. Really happy." "I am, Mom," I say, walking over to sit beside her. I finally feel like myself again. It took me 6 years, a broken marriage, and a federal investigation to realize a fundamental truth about human nature. We often spend our lives begging for a seat at tables where we were never meant to sit, striving for the validation of people who view life as a ledger of transactions. We think that if we just work harder, bake better, or sacrifice enough of ourselves, we can earn our way into a circle that excludes us. But true family isn't a legacy name, a bank account, or a corporate asset block. It isn't something you have to sign away your soul to belong to. Family is found in the people who see your worth without requiring a sacrifice, who protect your peace instead of using it as a shield, and who stand by you when the storms come, rather than navigating you directly into the eye of them. I lost a husband, a mother-in-law, and the future I thought I wanted. But in the wreckage of their empire, I found my own strength. I didn't just survive the Vance family. I built a life that belongs entirely to me.